Hello, everyone. Of course, this is
Hello.
a live show, so there could be some things going bad. Okay, I am Burak and host of this wonderful conversation with Man Booker Prize winner Irish author Anne Enright. Welcome, Anne. Thanks for being here.
It's lovely to meet you, Burak. Thanks for hosting.
Thank you. So we are going to talk about Anne's latest novel, The Wren, which has just been translated into Turkish in this January by the name of Çitkuşu, which means wren in Turkish.
Mm.
And the translator is Mert Doğrer, and the publisher company is Delidolu. So I would like to thank Delidolu again for organizing this wonderful conversation with Anne. I'm so lucky to do this with you. So welcome again.
Thank you very much. And hi from Dublin, where it's a almost sunny day out there.
Beautiful. So, before we delve into this wonderful novel, I would like to give some brief information about your life and career to the Turkish readers because I know you very well because I've been following you since forever, but
Mhm.
I want them to get to know you a bit more. So, start with that.
Okay.
Okay. She was born in Dublin on Earlsfort Terrace Street in number 17. Her grandmother was one of the first Irish women to get a university degree, which was very rare at that time. And Anne herself learned to read at the age of 3. She went to Canada to Pearson College at the age of 16. And when she came back to Dublin at Trinity, she studied English and philosophy. She spent 4 years in theatre, put plays on every week, and acted as well. She was a theatre actress, which was very lovely. Um, she had an MA in creative writing and once a student of Angela Carter at East Anglia University in 1986 and 7, I guess. She had a job in television for 6 years, was a producer and director, and made an Irish show called Nighthawks. And up until now, she has written 8 novels, including The Wren, 2 collections of stories which put together in a book called Yesterday's Weather, with a few additions from the earliest stories. And she has a nonfiction book called Making Babies, which is probably the most personal book of her and was very successful when it was out. And in the late 2025, her latest book called Attention was out, which involves 24 articles on life, art, literature, memories, and the world. Her fourth novel, The Gathering, won the prestigious Man Booker Prize in 2007. Her work has been nominated for a Women's Prize for Fiction for 5 times, including shortlisted The Wren. She is 2 times winner of Irish Novel of the Year with The Gathering and The Green Road, and Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence with The Forgotten Waltz. She is the winner of Writers' Prize for Fiction in 2024, Shamusini Award for Arts and Letters in 2025, and the Wyndham Campbell Prize and Lifetime Achievement Award. These are a few I can mention, and she was the first inaugural laureate for Irish fiction between 2015 and 2018. She is a professor of creative writing at UCD. Well, and such a career, we can only imagine. So, how do you feel about it? Because you hear this over and over again in these kind of events.
Yeah, I should do more events, and then I would be reminded, because I think every time you sit down at the to face the blank page or at the desk, it's still the same, whatever it is, and it kind of exists separate to how the books are received or how the kind of reputation grows or ebbs or whatever happens. And these things, yeah, sometimes I do say, oh, well, at least I've won a few prizes. I suppose I couldn't be that bad, But in general, it's not really something that accompanies me through the day, put it that way. I'm more interested in what I'm trying to write or next more than anything else, I suppose.
Yeah, and I understand why people call you the rock star of Irish literature.
Hmm. Well, I'm a middle-aged woman, Barack. It's very nice, but
Yeah.
I don't necessarily see it. But it's always lovely to get a compliment, put it that way.
Okay, so I forgot to say our audience that there will be a Q&A after our conversation. So if you have any questions for Anne, please write it down on YouTube comment section and I will ask for it after our chat. So let's talk about this wonderful novel that I have read 4 times now.
Wow.
For this. Okay, my first question is a classic one, but how did you came up with the idea for this story and which character came to you first? But I know that you always believe in the problems more than the ideas. So perhaps what were the problems for this book to put it together?
That's a very good question. I mean, an idea feels like a single thing, and you can't build a book with one thing. You need at least two things working in contradiction, things that have to be figured out in some way or expressed in some way. So, one of the problems that I was thinking about was it was during lockdown in 2020. I had my previous book had sort of flamed and died in a tour in America that I had to abandon for lockdown. So it was about this time of year, it was late March, early April, and I was walking the local hills and reading lyric poetry. I couldn't concentrate or focus for more than 2 minutes at a time, and fiction seemed too long for me to read. So I went and I was reading ancient poetry. I was reading poetry in Irish, and all of this was really surprising. I was looking out over Dublin, thinking about all the people in their small, separate lives now, all in those houses, and I'm thinking about the lyrical and the lovely. So that. And then back home, of course, it was just one foot in front of the other. It was just getting through one day, another day. It was immensely practical. It was keeping everything sort of tamped down, keeping the emotions level, keeping the kids going. So I think that possibly was the contradictions in the book between Carmel, who is this super pragmatic, very ordinary, very pragmatic, efficient sort of person, and her father, Phil, who is a lyrical poet who thinks about birds and, trees and sky. It's not necessarily a very good person. Carmel doesn't seem like a very good person, which probably is, She's not, you wouldn't sentimentalize Carmel.
Yeah, I will ask that in a bit. But before that, I have a question about the title, the Ren, because I know it comes from the poem written by Phil, dedicated to his daughter Carmel. But also in the late of the novel, there is this story about the Wren boys. In
Yes.
Irish tradition, they would go out on St. Stephen's Day and hunt for the wrens. Of course, there is two wrens in the title coming from the poem, but it kind of resonates with me on so many different levels. Like it reminds me of Nell as a bird, as a wren, out there in the world and being hunted by this wren boy, Phelim,
Oh,
and
yeah.
also Carmel is like a wren in the cup of her father's hand. So, can you talk a little bit about the idea for the title and the poem?
So the wren, that repetition comes from a song. And the song is written about this ritual that happens on the day after Christmas, which is a bringing in of the light ritual. It's a sacrifice, a kind of, they were called the Druids, the ancient priests, pre-Christian priests. And they sacrificed the smallest bird with the loudest voice, with this little hedge bird called the wren. And a lot of folklore is attached to that particular tiny bird. I liked the bird because it's small and its voice is so big.
Yeah.
I thought it was a really good way of talking about, I don't know, but maybe even about women. The wren is female in the book for me, and yes, sort of hunted and hiding, and yet with this amazing song. That the I write when I write sometimes women, but people in general, the way their voices go is a kind of act of freedom in some way. And I'm really taken by the way that birdsong is much more beautiful than it needs to be. So, I mean, why should it be so beautiful? They could just do what they do without being absolutely enchanting, these birds. So it is that kind of added beauty, loveliness, makes me sentimental, makes me
Yeah.
hopeful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Makes sense.
so the wren, I mean, they used to. My father grew up in the countryside, and the men who they went from house to house. They had a dead wren on a stick,
Yeah.
and they masked. I don't know if you have that tradition in any way in Turkey. They're
No.
called mummers in England. They put it, their chaos, their mayhem, their kind of violence and pantomime. They go from house to house, they drink. My father used to be terrified of them. And they require small money from, houses that didn't have any money. So,
Yeah.
they were, and now it's a little more kind of tame as a tradition. People do it because it's traditional and it's fun. But there was a wildness to it, really, back in the old days.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense now. Okay, okay. My next question is about the thing I think it's very important for your work, the idea, the understanding of shift, in shift in tone and shift in perspective, shift in point of view, even. So I would like to ask, how is your approach, to the idea of this shift in fiction? Because it's also very obvious in the Wren.
I Yeah, excuse me. I feel claustrophobic in books that don't change. I feel locked down. I feel sometimes like the writer thinks they know everything, and so that it requires a kind of submission that I'm not willing to give in the act of reading. I prefer a much more active kind of push me, pull you. I like the reader arguing with my characters or yeah. I mean, you can do that with plot. Okay, you can do it with plot. You can get the reader to shout, do not go into the room. The room is where the thing is, and they go into the room. But there are other things, Nell, that aren't so plotted. Nell, who is Carmel's daughter, starts on a bad affair, a bad love affair, and the reader should, I hope, be kind of slightly appalled. It's like, don't go into the room now. Don't do it. She's attracted to
Yeah.
the dark side. She's young, um, and like her grandfather, poetic minded, and yeah, temporarily interested in the darkness.
Yep. So then, when we talk about Nell, why did you start the story with Nell?
So I didn't start the writing with Nell. I was with
Yeah.
Carmel, and she was really annoying me. I was with her mother, writing the mother, and I was writing the poetry of the grandfather, Phil. And I thought, I suddenly realized I could get Carmel pregnant. I mean, what would happen?
Yeah.
What would happen if she had a baby? And I also knew, because Carmel was on her own, she doesn't trust men because her father was so, was not worthy of her trust. He left when she was young. So
Yeah.
whatever she was going to do, she was not going to involve a man. And I realized that I could have in Nell that thing, which is an idealized child, a child who is entirely loved. I wanted to catch the sense of children being so incredibly themselves from the first day of their life. That and Nell would be a child who didn't lose this sense of absolute selfhood.
Mhm.
So I created Nell in order to be loved
Yeah.
in the book by Carmel, and of course, tragically, Carmel doesn't love her well enough, or thinks she doesn't love her well enough. So
Also, there is a different choice of narration for these two different
yes.
characters. Nell is in the first person, just like Phil, because she is just alike her grandfather, and Carmel in the third. It just seems like there's a distance between you and Carmel, right?
Yeah, I mean, Carmel is a conventional person. She's not interested in chaos or in wildness. She wants to keep everything nice. She's a very keen on on interior decoration. I mean, the details of her house matter to her very much. She runs a business. She keeps it all going. Um, and so third person, past tense, that's the kind of book she would read, actually. That's, she was
Yeah,
picking up a book that would be what she would like to see. She doesn't want surprises in a book.
yeah,
Whereas Nell is all about where is it, what is it, where am I going, and that kind of beautiful sort of not knowing that comes with being young. She's also very online, and that
yeah.
means that she's in a kind of constant present tense as well, because online never goes into the past. It's just there.
True, very true. But also the difference between mother and daughter, and it's just like a juxtaposition of these two senses of Nellness and Carmelness in the story, which is really good to observe.
Well, but good. I mean, I like the way you say, I like the way you say that.
Yeah,
When I know a character and I spend a really quite a long time with them as I'm writing them, maybe not many words, but much consideration goes into it to
yeah,
see what they're going to do, how they're going to move, and what their tone is, how they see things. Even in Carmel's sense, what kind of brain they have. What kind of, that's kind of new. We didn't think about that when we were growing up. Now, the young people all talk about ADHD, and I don't know if they do in Turkey, do they? Is that a
yeah,
common thing? Yeah.
yeah. They
See,
can
it's
talk.
all neuroscience. When I was young, it was all Freud. It was like
Yeah,
Oedipus complex, and now it's ADHD. I think I prefer the Oedipus complex. It has more kind of, you know,
yeah.
movement to it and possibilities. But
Young people are the same everywhere, so they talk about.
yes, it's a general language now.
Yes, that's right. But I also say that I can understand Carmel as well, and I loved her really because she was this guideless, and as a girl, her father abandoned the family, her mother is indifferent, and her violent-ish sister Imelda is very harsh on her. So
Well,
is
she thinks.
yeah, she thinks, yeah,
Yeah,
we see
Imelda is probably quite nice.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
She
sorry
did
to
love the
interrupt.
Carmel.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's all right. We see
yeah.
from the point of Carmel, of course. Yeah,
Yes,
you're right. But I think this is something praiseworthy for Carmel. She's strong and she has the baby on her own
yeah.
and
So
independent.
when I read her, she's a bit sarcastic, actually, Carmel. And when I read these, when I read in her voice to actually not just an Irish audience, there's a big amount of recognition. So she's kind of tough the way women are tough when they have to do things,
Right.
when they have to rear too many children, when they have to go through war or poverty or all, there are many reasons for women to just keep it all going. And I see it everywhere. So this idea that motherhood is a lovely state is
Mhm.
offset by the fact that it requires a profound toughness from the people who undertake it.
Yes. Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about Nell as well. She is, this representative of a young generation, new generation. We can call it Gen Z or whatever, and a character of this time, our time. And although she is very brave, sexually adventurous, and very online, like you said,
Hmm.
she's also very fragile and vulnerable at the same time because she is away from home and she doesn't obsess over the end of the world, for example, but she's really concerned with the this extinction of nightjar and something about bees. So her focus on these details, in a sense, pinpoints the micro sensibilities in terms of this grand narrative. Can we say that?
I think that's possible. Yeah, no, that's her way in. I mean, she is of the age. I think she's 22, 23 in the book.
Yep.
Um, but she's of an age where she describes herself all the time. If it's people they say, me, this is what I'm like.
Yes.
So
Yes.
she defines herself by her interest. 10 or 15 years ago, if you were writing about climate change, it would be a polemic, it would be an argument. It would be like you were trying to prove it. But for excuse me, for Nell's generation, it's already happened. So she's slightly in mourning for what is already lost, and she talks about a little bird that's no longer there, the nightjar, which is a nocturnal animal
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Ireland. It was and is gone. So her friends are interested in fascism, she says, and surveillance culture, and she's interested in the unbearable fate of the bees.
yeah,
So, I mean, they have a huge amount to face, young people, and they negotiate it, I'm sure, on their own terms. You know, you have to pick a fight, and that's her fight that she
yeah,
picks. Yeah.
yeah. I call her who doesn't love Nell, you know?
Ah, good.
She's so, she's so lovely.
Like I really missed her when I had to stop writing her as well.
Really.
Yes, I did. I mean, she was so easy to write by the end. It was hard to, once I caught it, and if I needed, structurally, I needed to say where she was now, I just go, oh, typey type. There she was. She was just right there for me.
Yeah, she's so lovely. So when we talk about Nell, let's talk about this guy, Phelim, and his relationship with Nell. Nell is just away from him, as I said before, very vulnerable and in very problematic relationship with Phelim. Not so perfect, but handsome, devilish, long, tall guy. What can we say about Phelim in the story?
So I was really interested by reading younger women, and how many of them were writing about terrible, terrible love affairs, and a kind of masochistic interest. I thought, oh God, what was the 70s for? We fought for you to want this now, but, um, and I didn't want to make Phelim into too much of a kind of. I wanted to keep him a little bit mysterious. He's one of three brothers, actually, and his elder brother is a psychopath. No, yeah, his elder brother is quite nice. His younger brother is a psychopath. He's sort of in the middle. You don't quite know. He's just having a kind of he's randomly having sex with Nell, who thinks she's in love, and it gets kind of nasty, and she gets very obsessive and stalks his real girlfriend, and I don't know. It's just, I mean, I don't know what there is to say about all that except it happens, and it feels very extreme for the people, for the person involved at the wrong end of such an affair. And I was interested in, I think, is it limerence is the word for it, sort of that very adolescent, obsessive, slightly stalkerish infatuation, total infatuation. But you go back to the Romantic poets, and Keats was only 24, and he wrote love poetry that was obsessive, infatuated, and full of these kind of interest in death and mortality at the same time. I think I don't like my character. I don't say that my characters are going to be that way forever.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Phelim is also very online, just like
So
Nell.
Phelim is online, and for the astute reader, which I suspect you are an astute reader here, you will see the signs, or the questions.
Uh-huh.
So you will see the questions about how online Phelim is, and is this where a lot of his personal sexual style is coming from?
Very true. And it's also important what you said. We see these characters from the point of view of Nell and Carmel, not
Yeah.
seeing their perspective. That's important.
So I don't know with Phelim whether he knows what it's probably just more random and not as interesting to him.
Yes, that's right. And again, this scene with Phelim's family in Luth,
Yeah.
and I know that you are a master of writing these familial scenes, and I really love them. So it's also interesting to see such characters as, old Granny Poem and Cathal and Meave and these father figure. And what's your opinion of this family scenes in your novels, and how do you create them?
So that
from
family scene, as Nell leaves it, becomes very kind of phantasmagorical, as it were.
yeah.
She imagines the family sort of destroying her, and there is in and I was kind of taking the idea of the in-law as the outsider, and I think that's true for a lot of families. So somebody brings somebody home, and they all just look at the newcomer and say, okay, 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 maybe we'll see if this one lasts. You know, they're not going to, or whatever. So, yeah, that family. Yeah, hard to really say. As I said, the older brother who's going to get the farm, Cahill, he's kind of a nice guy. And in fact, the party is for the christening of his child, and there's lots of children running around. But you sense all kinds of tensions underneath it all.
That's true. But it's a very beautiful scene. So yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
An old granny poem. Yeah.
She's so
Um,
lovely. She's so lovely. She talks about Phil and you know,
yeah. So, but that's what Irish people, even and Irish people in the countryside, recognize the figure of the poet,
yes.
because the figure of the poet is a really important cultural icon historically, going back absolute centuries in Ireland. So there goes the poet. The poet is somebody slightly elevated and outside of normal society. An old granny poem knows Phil is a poet and can recite his poems.
Yes, yes, right. When we talk about Phil, there's Phil, of course, and he's dead, kind of a ghost in the story, but at the center, because it connects everyone together. But Nell can connect with him through the poems, and Carmel as well connect with him through her memories and her childhood, you know. And finally, on she sees a YouTube video of Phil,
Yeah.
26 views plus one. And what can we say about Phil? I don't like him, but
So you don't have to like him, I
yeah,
suppose. Some people do not dislike him.
yeah,
He is very much of his reputation is very much of its time. So he wrote lyrical poems that were very popular in Ireland in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and went on to produce the great poetry of someone like Seamus Heaney or Michael Longley. Really important, wonderful work. And, you know, he's no better than he should be, we say. He's not, he leaves his wife because she gets sick and he can't stand it. So he doesn't leave her coldly. He leaves her because he loves her so much that he,
if you
you know,
believe so.
so he's one of those artists who thinks that everything that happens happens to him. And
Uh-huh.
I think young people would say he would find it impossible to decenter himself from the story of what's happened to his wife. So he makes lovely poems about what happens to
Yeah,
his wife.
poems are really great. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I mean, I've met poets like this, you know, who say, "I left my wife, and here's a lovely poem about how awful I am." And you just go, "Well, I'm glad you got a poem out of it." It's like, and they don't kind of recognize the slight disconnect there that other people see.
Yeah.
But you know, anyway, Phil, he went to America and he turns up as a clip. You're right that he's dead. And this is really important. He exists in the book as language. He exists as the poems themselves. And he turns up on a clip on YouTube, and Carmel sits there all night looking at her dead father, going, "Oh my God," and trying to figure out what age she is now, looking at him and what age he was, and all that stuff. She had seen him on the television when she was young, and that was, oh my God, my father is famous, and now here he is, and it's a lot, and it's slightly anyway. Nell doesn't have to look for him online because her phone actually delivers, you know, her algorithm delivers a clip of her grandfather to her phone, and she goes, she might have ignored it, but she and her friend Lily both look at him for 2 seconds and say, "Who's that creep?" Because he is a bit creepy.
That's right.
So
While we're
that's fakeness, you know. It's that fakeness is kind of creepy.
That's a bit creepy, yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree that. So while we are talking about this poetry, plays a great role in the novel, as you said. So how did you work on it, on the poems? How did you create these poems? And uh, can you talk a little bit about this old Irish poetry, you
Yeah.
know?
So I worked on the poems with great difficulty. That's the answer. How did I do it? With great difficulty. Um, I wrote poems as Phil. I was very interested, or I seemed to know. I mean, Phil himself was just so easy. He was like I had his suit hanging up in the wardrobe. I could put it on. I knew Phil so well.
Hmm.
And you know, I knew so many of this style of man in the 70s and 80s. You would meet them and know them. He was very knowable to me and hadn't been written much, I thought. But anyway, the poetry was a much different, more interesting problem. I liked the technical challenge. I liked the ambition of it, and I thought it would push my own. You know, you want to be doing something interesting that you haven't done before. I knew, or I thought very seriously about his formation as a poet, how much of the metaphysical poets, how much of Patrick Kavanagh. So it was still extraordinarily hard. I reached out to some poets because I am not a poet. And I kind of think of poetry as somehow sacred and beyond the technical. You know, I said, you know, is this poem all right, to Jane Clark, poet, Irish poet? And as soon as I said it, I realized, you know, it looks like a poem, it reads like a poem. Why should it not be a poem? And it was because it was not coming from me, from some deep wellspring from the heart. Anyway, once I realised that Phil could translate medieval Irish poetry from the Gaelic, I was very happy because he's not a bad translator. He did versions. I thought he was okay. He was okay.
Also, you did ask a poet at the airport about a poem, right?
Well, this is really embarrassing. But, I
Not
mean,
not embarrassing. It's very sweet of you.
uh, so the wonderful Irish poet Paul Muldoon is an old friend of mine. I met him when I was a student, actually, back in East Anglia in 1986, and he's a lovely man. And I met him. We were both in the airport, and we were both early, of course, and we both had our reading material. These are writers on the road. Paul had his periodicals that he was reading, and we were chatting away and catching up and a bit of gossip, and I realized I have my entire novel on an email on my phone, and it contains a poem, and he might be able to read it for me and tell me if it's okay. And I was like,
What
and
did
I
he
also
say?
wanted to say I wrote a poem. So I showed it to him, and he held up the phone, and he said, "You know, these glasses aren't." he, I mean, it was just awful. If anyone ever does that to me, I'll be like, well, fortunately, you can't read a whole novel. And he
Yeah.
said, yes, yes, it's more a version, he said, than a translation. And so I called Phil's first book, or one of his books, Versions, and with a little pun on verse. And he liked the repetition of the word ice, which I hadn't even noticed. And yeah, and then he looked to see whether he was boarding on his flight, which or not. So yeah,
Such a moment.
yeah, but you know, writing is really funny because you're basically in a room for 3 years, and it's like you're shouting or dancing, or it's kind of vaguely crazy, but it's, you know, the mute button is pushed because nobody has seen this work. I don't show the work until I'm done. So it's like you're doing this very extravagant, very extreme thing in an outer silence. So I got a bit excited when I saw a real poet. I'm embarrassed to say.
Okay. So I want to talk about a character that nobody talks about.
Oh
I
yeah.
She is very fun to read. This American wife Connie.
Ah.
She's very funny. She's very good, and Granny of Nell, of course. But there is this nuance in the novel. I really liked it. It says she's very different person when Nell talks to her, when Nell recognizes her. So, what can we say about that? The attribution of her to the story, you know?
So she's really yeah, that's very I'm just looking at the book now to see
Okay.
where she writes a letter. She writes a letter to Nell saying, I knew your grandfather. I mean, she's a step grandmother. Um,
It's a beautiful letter, by the way.
I was very pleased when I arrived at the letter, and then I thought maybe it was too politically of the moment. And she is not saying that she was 21 when she met him, and of course he was older. And she says, in those days we were kind of attracted to the badness. We knew we didn't. I just wonder where I can find it now because I don't talk about it much. Very well spotted. It's almost like she has very much changed and the world has changed.
Yeah.
And she recognizes this and she encapsulates it for Nell, saying, "Oh yeah, dear Nell, here it is. We who loved Phil knew on some level that we loved him not despite, but because of his badness. In those days, that was quite the thing. It loosed something in our psyches, I think, which was not always a force for good. This is why she sets up a bursary. I can't absolve myself completely of Phil's poor behavior. So I adored him, certainly for the first while, and this may have contributed to his slightly distorted sense of himself. I thought I had no choice but to adore him, but of course I did have a choice. That goes without saying.
Yeah, beautiful letter. There are two letters in the novel, one from Phil to Carmel when she's 16, and one from Connie to Nell.
Yeah.
These letters are really beautiful, and Connie is a really good character, I think. This is my opinion.
So, but yeah, it's like the questions were being asked about what these monster writers, how disappointing to discover that someone we thought was lovely or wrote lovely books or not very lovely books was actually a monster. How did we admire him so much? I mean, first of all, you say don't go around admiring people if you don't want to be disappointed. Don't invest your admiration in just because someone can write doesn't mean anything about them as a moral human being. And the other thing was that what social forces, what complicities and collaborations, what the effect of such charisma had on certainly young women, but men for sure as well. And we're looking at leaders and autocrats who are adored not for being good, but for being less than good. And you think, well, why should people do that? And what happens when they change? And do they change? So yeah, I wanted to get to the heart of that a little.
Yes, yes, that's very deep, actually, very philosophical. So, through the end of the novel, Nell says to her mother when she brings some friend, David, to home, and she says, "You sound so Irish." And she responds, "How do you want me to sound?"
Mm.
And this idea of being Irish is a very central theme in your novels, Irish traditional sense. What's your opinion about that, being Irish? What does that mean?
Yeah, I remember back in the day, who some president said, America is the only country that you can come to and be an American. You become an American. Um, I suppose national identities can shift a little, but it seems to be something that you're handed.
Uh-huh.
Like there it is. Go figure it out. And I'm always asked about it. And I want to say, well, I can't wake up, Polish. I can't wake up in the morning, anything else.
Yes.
So you do sort of look around. I mean, it is amazingly rewarding as a kind of literary culture. So there's a huge conversation to take part in here in terms of books. And I know you're a keen reader of Irish fiction.
Yeah.
So that's great, and I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining, put it that way.
Yeah. Also, in your biography, it's written she stayed, she
Yeah,
stayed in Ireland. Why
yeah.
did you stay?
Well, because I could, and I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
really there are things that I could do that previous generations could not do. One of them was right while after my children were born, because so many women's careers just stopped. And it was considered impossible to be creative in the physical world and in the intellectual world. So it was like you'd been robbed of your fictional capacity. Really strange, like that you couldn't write once you had children. I thought that it was a very odd thought. Um, so I was able to do that. And I was also able to survive the moral atmosphere of Ireland in the 1980s, which was a time of great change from a conservative Catholic time to a more liberal and progressive time. So, in some ways, I am the change because my generation had already made up their minds about the future, and the previous generations were holding on to the past, legally, contractually, in terms of religion and laws. And so it was a really amazing tension there between the two generations, and it's been quite a story. It's been quite a road.
I'm glad you stayed and became the rock star of Irish literature.
Ah,
I have no complaint.
okay.
Okay. So, the two important themes in the novel is violence and sex, and you masterfully write about those two things, actually, in all of your novels. There's also violence in Duran Duran as well,
Yeah,
sexual violence and violence to the animals, the scene with Imelda and Carmel and Nell and
yeah,
Carmel, and also the violence in Phil's childhood, very, very basic. It comes so natural because of the human disposition. I understand that, but could you talk a little bit about these two themes?
yeah. Sure. So we watch so much movies that are full of violence. I mean, people are getting shot on our screens more often than they're doing anything else, really. And so we are fictionally interested in violence. I'm more interested in the real stuff than the fictional stuff, or I'm more interested in getting in there and seeing what that might be. When Phil grows up, there is a badger baiting. A badger is an Irish animal, and he's killed. It's killed by dogs, and it's like the hunting of the wren. It's a kind of primal, semi-sacred, really brutal ritual kind of violence. So a kind of feeling of sacrifice and very ancient feeling to it all. So later on, there's a fight over inheritance between Carmel and her sister, and they have a scrap, like a family scrap. So they're fighting like 8-year-old, 7 and 8-year-old children, except they're in their 30s. It's a terrible scene, but I find it kind of comical because it's so foolish, and because they're no good at fighting. So they, I mean, so I describe it in very careful detail, and I had a lot of interest in writing it. And when I read the audiobook in English, and I kept laughing, the sound engineers thought that I was, what kind of madwoman am I for this kind of violent, quite cruel scene? Nobody gets hurt per se. They just they kind of display their stupidity. um, so that violence happens as comedy, as it were. And then there is in the next generation, there is a violent scene, which was astonishingly difficult for me to write because it is where Carmel loses it. I mean, she's a lot on psychologically, Carmel. She's had a very tough road. And when she got pregnant, I knew that in order for Carmel to be a properly tragic figure, she would have to mess it up in some way. She would, or feel that she had messed it up in some way. So this, again, not very extreme, somehow ordinary, or when I say ordinary, let me substitute the word domestic. This domestic violence is truly terrible. So, or I found it, or I wrote it to be truly terrible. And, but you think that's what most violence is actually. It is domestic. And that was part, I think, of my looking down during lockdown on all of those houses in Dublin, thinking of families kind of cooped up together, sort of caged from house to house. And I knew that bad things were happening. I just knew that bad things were happening there. So yeah. So I like to put the things that happen into my books. I like putting money in the books as well. You know what I mean? A bit of reality. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not a realist, I'm not a naturalist, but you know how many naturalist writers you read and you wouldn't know how they made their income, or things seem to happen magically. And nobody, in some cases, nobody ever has sex and children arrive, or there is no violence. So the tone is this kind of other thing. It's not life, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think the end of the novel is hopeful?
I hope it is. I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you think it's hopeful?
Yeah, I think it's hopeful because Karma's last line is she was grown about Nell, and
Yeah,
Nell's last sentence is about bird again. The bird will always be the bird. It's very, very, very hopeful, I guess.
it is hope. Well, what Nell is doing, or what the book is doing, is a farewell to language at the end of the book, to somehow leave the world be itself without our descriptive possessing, and beyond possessing what it is to possess the world. I mean, this is what humankind does to the world. They think they own it, so they can do what they like. So language is that first act of possession. I think, is it Slavoj Žižek says to name something is to murder it, because you replace the object with the word. Anyway, so that's a kind of farewell to language. Nell leaves and she comes back, and that's what children do. That's what children do. So
Yes, that's right. And again, I want to say that who doesn't love Nell? Because when Carmel says that I gave all my life to you, and she says "fuck you,"
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
it's
well,
very
that's sort of, yeah, the mother martyrdom. I gave you everything. She said, that's a very classic conversation. Nobody asked you to give
yeah,
it, yeah, whatever. What does a parent owe a child? What does a child owe a parent? These are beyond language and beyond argument in some senses. Once you're arguing about it, you've lost.
yep. So, would you ever write about a famous person again?
Oh, I'm done. No, 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 no.
In actress,
Yeah.
after the Red.
So actress in the rain, I write, when I write books, sometimes they're talking to each other a little bit, or they stand on either end of the bookshelf. And actress is a famous actress, glamorous to her daughter and to the world. And Phil was different in that I could actually show what he had written on the page, so you could experience him in a proper sort of way, or experience his reputation and its limits. Um, I think parents are always sort of famous to their children. It's that mythological kind of thing that our infant gaze brings to our own family life. No, but I think I'm done. I think I'm done. Yeah. I mean, yeah. It's funny. It's possibly because I was interested in the fact that the books go away from you and the world has opinions. Yeah.
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 So what are you working on now?
So I'm working on something that has a kind of intriguingly empty center. I'm working on a, so I don't know whether to fill up the center or not.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm working on something.
Okay.
Yes, which is structurally happening in it's a woman's life, I suppose.
Yep. Okay. My favorite book of yours is The Green Road. Maybe I can expect some story about Hannah as well, independently, you know?
God, you know, you're Team Hannah. I have a
Yeah.
few people.
I'm a Teen Hannah.
Yeah, I have a friend here who's Team Hannah. I'm like, what? Yeah, Hannah, poor Hannah. So I took a line from Hannah. I was gonna, there was, Hannah is an actor or a failed actor, or thinks of herself as a failed actor. I mean, 95% of actors are unemployed at any given time. So, they're only ever 5% successful, no matter how successful they are. Um, so it's a very difficult to define if you're working or not working. Not working is so much part of the job. And Hannah describes her life to herself, and she says there was no path. And that was in 2015. And one line I put in and took out and put in again. She's describing how she's never walked the red carpet in Cannes Film Festival. And she says there was this and that. And she says there was sexual humiliation, but no path. Now, I knew that actresses everywhere and in theatres that I had known suffer from humiliations of this kind. Um, and the fact that I didn't want to say that because it would mean that you would think less well of actresses.
Mhm.
It was really interesting that in 2 years' time that had just absolutely been turned around,
Yeah.
so that they kind of handed back the shame. Um, but that little sense, that little frisson of there's something very true here that I can't say, was why I then went and wrote the book Actress afterwards. Hannah, just
Yeah.
that unease, just to explore that unease a little bit more.
That makes a lot
You
of
want
sense.
to go back to Hannah?
Yes, I
Hannah,
did.
she has to give up drinking, I think.
Hopefully.
We
Hopefully.
we hope. We hope. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. These are all my questions about this wonderful novel, Duran Duran. But I have two more general questions.
Hmm.
But if you want to add anything about this novel, do you want to add
I'm
anything?
so pleased that we got to Connie.
Yes, me
Yeah,
too. Me too. I really
yeah.
love her.
And it was good to remind myself. It was a very calm moment when I realized I had to write her letter now.
Yeah, that letter is very beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay. Before my last two questions, I will remind our audience you can ask any question to Anne on the comment section on YouTube, and I can ask her here.
So long as it's nice,
Yeah,
the question. Any friendly question. Yeah.
maybe, maybe. We will see that. But before that, I ask you about your thoughts about The Gathering, the novel The Gathering, because, after all these years, it was the not the first novel, but the world became much more involved in your writing, You were writing before that, of course.
Yes.
How do you feel about that book?
So, well, I mean, there's a difference thinking about the book's reputation or, in the world, and the book as it was writing it. I mean, it's gone through. So I wrote the book in a room in a small town called Bray, County Wicklow, and then I would shut the door and go out to my children, who were very young at the time, and he was shortlisted for the Booker, and I was bringing my son to school in his first week at school. She said, and people are saying congratulations. And he said, why are they gratulating you? It's my first week at school. It was
Yeah.
like day two. So that was such an amazing time on both in on both levels, as it were. So it's quite a harsh book in some ways, and that seemed to be self-evident as I was writing it. But then when it became, I mean, why not? I mean, it was a difficult subject.
Yes.
The narrator was angry, was one accusation I felt afterwards. And I'm like, well, there's plenty for her to be angry about. Are we supposed to not be angry now? Why? And why does fiction not allow anger? Anyway, so then it won the prize. And I was going around the world reading this, but it had been an almost private creative event. And that was really, and I was reading Veronica, the narrator, and thinking, oh my God, she's really, she's quite something. Very, quite harsh to this very absent mother figure she has. And I can't remember, I haven't read it in a very long time. I don't think I had to look at it on again, in an airport on my phone. I was going to do an interview about it. I had to look it up. I think I had to buy it on Kindle or something and look it up on my phone. I didn't have a copy to see what would I say about it. But it was recently, there's always endless horse races with books. So the Irish Book Awards are saying, what's your favorite novel of the last blah, blah, blah. And it's in another, vote for this book, or do not vote for this, vote for some other book. And I thought, has it not done its work on the, popularity contest? It's, I'm not really interested in how popular it is, put it that way.
Yeah, of course. But I remember while reading Duran Duran that Liam is also in fond of, birds. You always talked about the bird. Is it coming from your preoccupation with gardening?
Ah, I mean, Liam loves the bones of dead animals,
Yeah.
like all boys. And so he loves the little skeletons of birds and the dead finch weathering by the wall. So you're a very good reader, Burak, because I didn't realize I saw that after I had written Nell. And I thought, oh, here it is again. And I hadn't seen it as a possibility. No, well, I think I tried to rescue a bird when I was maybe 7 or 8. We
Yeah.
put it in a cardboard box and, the whole thing. And of course, the bird died. So maybe that was the
Yeah.
main event.
Okay. So my last question to you is about your latest book, Attention. Now, is a new one that I read in January. And you write both, this is why I'm asking. You write both fiction and nonfiction. So you can talk us about a bit the difference between creating both, the fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, well, even the nonfiction isn't always the same kind of nonfiction,
Yes.
so some of it is kind of critical interest, and some of it is a bit more forensic, trying to find the truth of something or making an argument. And some of the pieces are memoir, so they have slightly different voices and different conversations within them. I think when I'm writing nonfiction, I'm very privileged because I don't have to do lots of footnotes, and like my academic colleagues must be, quite annoyed that I can produce something without going into all the detail that they have to do. But some of the energy of fiction making is surely there in the feeling that a essay in a nonfiction can go somewhere new or different or interesting, that you don't quite know what the path will be through the essay. But fiction making is a kind of it's a kind of dream time for me, whereas this is much more a pursuit. It's much more, I'm looking for something,
Yeah.
so it goes straight in, whereas fiction just goes out like that.
Okay, these are all my questions, actually. And we have one from the audience, so I will ask you that. Okay.
Yeah.
It says, you mentioned that you really know Phil type of poet, the charismatic, self-mythologizing man. Nell never knew her grandfather. Was she partly your way of exploring what happens when a young woman inherits that poetic ideal of love from a man like Phil?
So Nell knows his poetry, and a little to Carmel, her mother's dismay, I suppose, or interest or something. Nell reads the poetry to be reassured. It is very reassuring work, that there's some loveliness in it. And something about the maleness of that reassuring voice, of that lyrical voice, makes her feel comforted and makes her feel more safe. So, yeah, what was the question again?
Okay.
So she reads him,
Yep.
and she also has the same kind of, as it were, genetic disposition to adventure and to language, and that same kind of energy. She's a kind of a poet herself, but she's slightly lost because she's online all the time. She's there's no clear path for a poet now, the way there used to be in Phil's time, when a poet was something to be.
Yep. Okay. Another question. It's more like a general question, you know. Can you ask her if she has read Rosalind Balban? They both have the naked, almost brutal honesty. I was wondering if she has read her, and if yes, what she thinks about her work. Does she agree with me?
Rosamund?
Rosalind Balban.
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Always good to get a new name. Yeah. Thank you for the suggestion. I'm going to look her up now. I shouldn't be on my phone while I'm on the Zoom, but yeah. So you know, books do well in different territories in ways that are unexpected, and I love the fact that a Turkish reader will see connections that might not be seen by, you know, a French one or a German one or something like that.
All right. So we don't have any questions, I guess, anymore. Okay.
Okay.
I think that's all.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you for your time. It was so lovely to talk with you, you know.
It's so nice to talk to you too, and for those very astute questions. I feel very well read indeed, and that's a great courtesy. I'm so pleased. Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you. Okay, I'll say bye bye.
See you.
Bye bye. Thank you.